The sun was setting as James Wilson's town car pulled up to the gleaming glass doors of Elite Sky Terminal. After 16 hours in the air from Tokyo to New York, followed by a connection to this smaller regional airport, his body ached for home. But his mind was still running through the details of the deal he'd just closed. A partnership that would take his company, Apex Technologies, to new heights. "Thank you, Thomas," James said, handing his driver a generous tip. "Same time on Monday?" "You bet, Mr. Wilson. Enjoy your weekend, sir." James straightened his navy suit jacket as he stepped out. Despite the exhaustion, he maintained the polished appearance that had become his trademark in the business world. At 42, he had built Apex from a small startup in his garage to a tech powerhouse employing over 5,000 people. The MEAR latest deal would add another 1,000 jobs. The private terminal stood separate from the main airport, a sleek modern building where the ultra-wealthy and corporate elite could avoid the crowds and chaos of commercial travel. James had been using this terminal for nearly 5 years now, ever since Apex had acquired its first company jet. 2 uniformed attendants rushed forward to handle his luggage, recognizing him immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson," said the younger one, Alan, who had helped him many times before. "Welcome back. How was Japan?" "Productive, but I'm glad to be back," James replied with a tired smile. "My pilot called ahead, right? The jet needs refueling before we head to the home airport." "I'm not sure, sir," Alan said, looking slightly confused. "But Greg at the front desk can help you with that." James nodded and walked through the automatic doors into the terminal's main lounge. The space was designed to impress, with soaring ceilings, leather seating areas, and a bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. A handful of other travelers sat in separate areas, some working on laptops, others enjoying drinks while waiting for their flights. He approached the curved marble desk, where a man he didn't recognize sat looking at a computer screen. The name tag on his crisp white shirt read, "Robert Klein, Terminal Manager." "Good evening," James said. "I'm James Wilson. My pilot called ahead about refueling our jet. We'll need to depart in about an hour." Robert Klein looked up, his eyes moving quickly over James. Something in his expression changed, a subtle tightening around the mouth, a slight narrowing of the eyes. "Can I help you?" Klein asked, his tone noticeably cooler than the warm greetings James usually received here. "Yes, as I mentioned, I'm waiting for my jet to be refueled. The tail number is N789AX. My pilot should have called it in." Klein looked at his screen, scrolling slowly. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, he looked up with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I think you might be confused," he said loudly enough that several nearby people turned to look. "This is the private aviation terminal. The main terminal for commercial passengers is actually back down the road about 2 miles. He pointed vaguely toward the exit. "That's where you'll find the check-in desks for coach flights." The lounge, which had been filled with the quiet murmur of conversations and the gentle clinking of ice in glasses, suddenly went silent. James felt the weight of stares on his back. "I'm not confused," James replied evenly, keeping his voice calm despite the heat rising in his chest. "I've been using this terminal for years. My company has 3 jets registered here. The tail number, again, is N789AX and Apex Technologies Gulfstream G650. Klein's expression remained skeptical. He made a show of checking his computer again, his fingers tapping dramatically on the keyboard. "I don't see any record of that." "Are you sure you have the right terminal? The right airport, even?" His voice had taken on a condescending tone, as if speaking to someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of private aviation. By now, several of the lounge staff had stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange. James noticed Alan, who had taken his bag, standing nearby with a concerned expression. "Mr. Klein," James said, pulling out his phone, "I can show you the flight plan filed by my pilot, Jack Reynolds. He's been with me for 4 years and uses this terminal regularly." "Sir," Klein interrupted, standing up from his chair, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. This is a private facility for our members and their guests." James hadn't raised his voice at all. He took a deep breath, aware that every eye in the lounge was now on them. This wasn't the first time he'd faced this kind of treatment, but it never got easier. "I am a member," he said quietly, reaching for his wallet to pull out his Elite Sky club card. "I've been a platinum member since 2020. As he handed over the card, he noticed a woman at a nearby table watching the interaction with interest. She wore an expensive-looking pantsuit and had been working on a laptop with stacks of documents spread around her. Something about her seemed familiar, but in his current state of frustration and exhaustion, James couldn't place her. Klein took the card between two fingers as if it might be contaminated. He examined it closely, turning it over several times. "This looks similar to our membership cards," he said finally. "But I'm not convinced it's authentic. We've had issues with counterfeit credentials recently." He placed the card on the counter rather than handing it back directly to James. "Where exactly did you get this?" A hot flash of anger surged through James, but decades of navigating predominantly white corporate spaces had taught him the dangers of showing it. Instead, he pulled out his driver's license and company ID. "My name is James Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO of Apex Technologies. You can Google me if you'd like. Our company has been a client of this terminal for 5 years. We currently have 3 jets registered here and spend over $2 million annually in fees and services." Klein's face remained impassive, but a slight twitch near his left eye betrayed his discomfort. He glanced at the IDs, then back at James. "Anyone can print business cards," he said dismissively. "And just because you're wearing an expensive suit doesn't mean you belong here." He lowered his voice slightly, but not enough to prevent others from hearing. "Look, I'm trying to be reasonable, but this terminal serves a certain caliber of client, and we have protocols to maintain that standard." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Around the lounge, a few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others pretended to be absorbed in their phones or laptops, though James could tell they were listening intently. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Klein?" James asked, his voice steady despite the churning in his stomach. "I'm not suggesting anything," Klein replied with a shrug that contradicted his words. "I'm simply doing my job, which includes ensuring that only authorized personnel access this facility." He gestured toward the exit. "Now, if you'd like, I can call you a taxi to take you to the main terminal." Alan, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward. "Mr. Klein, I can vouch for Mr. Wilson. He's a regular client here." Klein turned a cold stare on the young attendant. "I don't recall asking for your input, Alan. Don't you have luggage to attend to?" Alan hesitated, clearly torn between helping a client he recognized and defying his boss. With an apologetic glance at James, he backed away. James felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw a text from Jack, his pilot. "Refueling complete. Weather looks good for departure in 30 minutes. Are you at the terminal yet?" "Mr. Klein," James said, turning back to the manager. "This has gone on long enough. My pilot just confirmed our jet is here and ready for departure soon. I've shown you my identification and membership card. I've been nothing but patient while you've been incredibly disrespectful. I'd like to speak with your supervisor immediately." Klein's face flushed slightly. "I am the terminal manager. There is no supervisor currently on site." He straightened his tie. "And frankly, your aggressive attitude is concerning. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll be forced to call security." The woman who had been watching the exchange stood up from her table and began walking toward the desk. James noticed several other staff members exchanging worried glances. "Call them," James said calmly, placing both hands flat on the counter. "And while we wait, I'll be calling the regional director of Elite Sky, who happens to be a personal friend. I'm sure she'll be very interested to hear how you're treating one of the terminal's biggest clients." Something flickered across Klein's face, the first hint of doubt in his self-assurance. He glanced at his computer screen again, perhaps actually, looking at the client records for the first time. "I don't appreciate threats," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "It's not a threat," James replied. "It's a promise that this interaction will have consequences." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other travelers were now openly staring, some whispering to each other. James could feel sweat forming at his temples, but he remained perfectly still, his gaze locked with Klein's. What happened next would change everything. The staring match between James and Robert Klein stretched on for several uncomfortable seconds. Around them, the previously peaceful terminal had become a theater, with unwitting passengers and staff now audience to the unfolding drama. James could feel his heartbeat in his throat, but his expression remained calm, a skill he'd perfected over years of high-stakes business negotiations. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be," Klein finally said, reaching for the phone on his desk. "I'm going to call security and they can sort this out." Before he could dial, a confident voice cut through the tension. "That won't be necessary, Robert." The woman James had noticed earlier was now standing beside him at the counter. Up close, he recognized her as Angela Chen, the regional director of Elite Sky Terminals. They had met at several business functions over the years, though they weren't close friends as he had implied to Klein. "Ms. Chen," Klein said, immediately straightening his posture, "I didn't know you were here today." "Clearly," she replied, her tone professional but cold. "I've been working on quarterly reviews in the corner." She turned to James with a warm smile. "Mr. Wilson, it's good to see you again. I apologize for any inconvenience. How was your trip to Tokyo? I heard the Nakamura deal went through. Congratulations." James felt the weight on his shoulders lighten slightly. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. Yes, the deal is finally done. 3 years of work, but worth it." Klein's face had drained of color as he looked back and forth between them. You two know each other?" Angela turned to him, one eyebrow raised. "Mr. Wilson is one of our most valued clients, Robert. Apex Technologies has been using our terminals exclusively for their executive travel for years." She looked pointedly at his computer, which you would know if you had actually checked our client database instead of making assumptions. Klein swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "There must be some mistake in the system. I didn't see." "The only mistake here," Angela interrupted firmly, "was your treatment of Mr. Wilson." She turned back to James. "Your jet is fueled and ready whenever you are. May I walk with you to the runway lounge? I'd like to catch up briefly about the new terminal we're opening next month near your headquarters. We've incorporated several of your suggestions into the design." James nodded, relief washing over him. He picked up his membership card from the counter where Klein had left it, placing it back in his wallet alongside his ID. "Mr. Wilson," Klein began, his voice now dripping with forced politeness, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to apologize." "We can discuss this later, Robert," Angela cut in. "For now, please call Alan back to bring Mr. Wilson's luggage to his jet." As they walked away from the desk, James could feel Klein's eyes burning into his back. The other travelers quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in their phones or magazines. Only when they reached a private corridor leading to the runway did Angela speak again. "I am so sorry about that, James. Truly." Her professional demeanor softened into genuine concern. "How long was that going on before I stepped in?" James sighed. "Long enough, but it's not the first time and it won't be the last." Angela shook her head, genuine anger flashing in her eyes. "It's unacceptable. Robert was hired just last month. He came with excellent references from another luxury service industry, but clearly there are issues that weren't disclosed." They paused at a window overlooking the tarmac, where James could see his jet being prepared for departure. The sleek white Gulfstream gleamed under the airport lights, the Apex Technologies logo visible on the tail. "It happens everywhere," James said quietly. "5-star hotels, exclusive restaurants, high-end stores. I walk in and people make assumptions. The better dressed I am, the worse it sometimes gets, like they think I'm trying too hard to belong in spaces where they believe I don't." Angela's face showed both understanding and frustration. "I'd like to say I can imagine, but I know I can't, not really." She hesitated. "What can we do? Besides the obvious with Robert, I mean." James thought for a moment. "Actually, there might be something, but let me think about it over the weekend. I'll call you on Monday." They continued walking toward the private exit that would take him directly to his waiting jet. James could see his pilot Jack doing final checks with the ground crew. "Will you file a formal complaint?" Angela asked. "I'll completely understand, if you do. What happened was inexcusable." James considered the question carefully. A complaint would certainly end Klein's career at Elite Sky, and possibly in the entire private aviation industry. Part of him wanted exactly that, to ensure the man never had the opportunity to humiliate someone else the way he had attempted to humiliate James. But another part of him, the part that had built a company culture known for its problem-solving approach rather than punitive measures, wondered if there might be a more constructive way forward. "Let me think about that too," he finally said. As they approached the door leading to the tarmac, Alan hurried up with James's bags. "Mr. Wilson," the young man said breathlessly, "I'm really sorry about what happened back there. I should have spoken up sooner." "It's okay, Alan," James assured him. "You were put in a difficult position." "It's not okay," Alan insisted, lowering his voice and glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "And it's not the first time Mr. Klein has done something like this." James and Angela exchanged looks. "What do you mean?" Angela asked. Alan shifted uncomfortably. "Last week there was a hip-hop artist who came through. Mr. Klein made him show ID 3 times and questioned the authenticity of his charter paperwork. The week before that, a woman wearing a hijab was here to meet her husband, and Mr. Klein insisted on having security escort her the entire time she was in the terminal." James felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest, the weight of a problem much bigger than one bad manager at one private terminal. "Thank you for telling us." "Alan," Angela said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I'd appreciate it if you'd document these incidents for me. My email is on the company directory." Alan nodded earnestly. "I will, Ms. Chen." After the young attendant left, Angela turned to James with determination in her eyes. "Whatever you decide about the formal complaint, Robert Klein will not be working here by this time tomorrow. I can promise you that." James nodded, appreciating her decisiveness but still turning over a different possibility in his mind. "Before you make any final decisions," he said, "let me run something by you." "Not now. I need to get home, and you probably have work to finish, but Monday?" "Of course," she agreed. "Whenever works for you." They reached the door to the tarmac, where Jack was waiting to escort James to the jet. "Everything okay, boss?" the pilot asked, clearly sensing the tension. "It is now," James replied, shaking Angela's hand. "Thanks for the intervention, Angela. I'll be in touch." As James walked across the tarmac toward his waiting jet, the cool evening air felt good against his skin. The confrontation had left him drained, adding to his travel exhaustion. But his mind was already shifting into problem-solving mode. Back inside the terminal, Robert Klein was frantically searching the client database, his face growing paler by the minute as he discovered exactly who James Wilson was. Apex Technologies was indeed one of Elite Sky's biggest clients. The 3 jets registered to the company accounted for substantial revenue, and there were notes in the system about a potential exclusive partnership that would make Elite Sky the sole provider of private aviation services for all Apex executive travel globally. And he, Robert Klein, had just accused the company's founder and CEO of trespassing and threatened to have him removed by security. As this realization sank, Klein looked up to see Angela Chen walking back into the main lounge. The expression on her face made his stomach drop. He knew his job was hanging by a thread if it wasn't gone already. Angela approached the desk slowly, her face unreadable. The few remaining travelers in the lounge were watching with undisguised interest, aware that something significant had happened, though most hadn't heard the full exchange. "Robert," she said quietly, "my office. Now." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked toward the administrative section of the terminal. Klein followed, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. He could feel the stares of the other staff members, could almost hear their whispered comments as he passed. In her office, Angela closed the door and took a seat behind her desk. She didn't invite him to sit. "Explain yourself," she said simply. Klein's mind raced, searching for an explanation that wouldn't sound as terrible as the truth. that he had taken one look at James Wilson and decided, based solely on his appearance, that he couldn't possibly be a legitimate client of the exclusive terminal. There was a misunderstanding, he began, his voice not nearly as confident as it had been earlier. I couldn't find his information in the system at first, and we've had issues recently with unauthorized people trying to access the facility, so I was being cautious. Angela's expression didn't change. You couldn't find his information because you didn't bother to look, Robert. I checked the system logs. You never even typed his name into the database. Klein felt sweat beading on his forehead. I thought I did. It must have been a system error. Don't lie to me, Angela said, her voice sharp. It makes this situation worse, not better. She leaned forward. I'm trying to understand what happened out there. Help me understand. For a brief moment, Klein considered continuing with his excuses, but the look in Angela's eyes told him she already knew the truth. I made an assumption, he admitted finally. A wrong assumption. Based on what? Angela pressed. Klein remained, silent, unable or unwilling to articulate the bias that had guided his actions. Angela sighed. Robert, do you know who Ms. Wilson is, beyond being our client? The CEO of Apex Technologies, he mumbled. Yes, and do you know what Apex Technologies does? Klein shook his head slightly. They're one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. They specialize in AI and machine learning solutions for healthcare. Their technologies have helped doctors detect early-stage cancers that would have been missed by conventional methods. They've saved thousands of lives. She paused, letting that sink in. James Wilson built that company from nothing. He's revolutionizing medical technology. He sits on the boards of 3 major hospitals. He's donated millions to education programs in underserved communities. With each accomplishment she listed, Klein seemed to shrink a little more. And beyond all that, Angela continued, he's a human being who deserved to be treated with basic respect and dignity when he walked into our terminal, something you failed to provide. I understand, Klein said quietly. It won't happen again. You're right about that, Angela agreed, because as of this moment, you no longer work for Elite Sky Terminals. Klein's head snapped up. You're firing me? Just like that? Don't I get a warning or some kind of progressive discipline? Angela's expression hardened. What happened out there wasn't a minor infraction, Robert. It was a fundamental violation of our core values, and according to what I've just learned from other staff members, it wasn't an isolated incident. The blood drained from Klein's face as he realized others had been reporting his behavior. I've worked in luxury services for 15 years, he protested. My record has been spotless until now. Has it? Angela asked, raising an eyebrow. Or have your previous employers simply not held you accountable? Either way, your time with Elite Sky is over. She slid a folder across the desk. HR has prepared your final paperwork. You'll be paid through the end of the month, but today is your last day. Outside, as James's jet lifted into the darkening sky, he found himself not thinking about the confrontation with Klein, but about possibilities, about turning an ugly incident into something constructive, about the conversation he would have with Angela on Monday, and the idea that had begun forming in his mind. Sometimes, the most powerful response to ignorance wasn't punishment, but education. The weekend passed quickly for James. After the confrontation at the terminal, he'd spent Saturday with his family, watching his son's baseball game, helping his daughter with her science project, and enjoying a quiet dinner with his wife, Lisa. He told her about the incident, of course. In their 15 years of marriage, they'd shared countless similar stories. What are you going to do? Lisa had asked as they sat on their back porch, watching the sunset with glasses of wine. I'm not sure yet, James had replied, though that wasn't entirely true. An idea had been forming since he'd left the terminal. But I think there's an opportunity here. Now it was Monday morning, and James sat in his office at Apex headquarters, looking out over the city skyline. His assistant, David, knocked lightly on the doorframe. Ms. Chen from Elite Sky Terminals is here for your meeting, he announced. Thanks, David. Send her in, please. Angela walked in looking professional in a gray business suit, though her expression was still troubled. James stood to greet her, offering her a seat in the comfortable chairs arranged around a small table near the window rather than across from his desk. "Coffee?" he offered. "Please." As David brought in a tray with coffee and water, Angela opened her portfolio. "Before we discuss whatever you wanted to talk about," she began, "I should let you know that Robert Klein has been terminated. It happened Friday evening immediately after you left." James nodded, not surprised. "Was that your decision, or did he force your hand?" "Both," Angela admitted. "I would have fired him regardless, but he made it easier by refusing to acknowledge what he'd done wrong. He kept insisting it was a misunderstanding and that he was just being thorough in his security protocols." She shook her head in disgust. "We've also discovered he had similar incidents with other clients that weren't reported up the chain. He'd only been with us for a month." "Bad hire?" James asked, stirring cream into his coffee. "Terrible hire," Angela confirmed. "But that's on us, on me specifically. His references checked out, but clearly his previous employers either didn't notice his behavior or didn't care." She looked directly at James. "I want you to know that what happened doesn't reflect Elite Sky's values. We're taking this very seriously." "I believe you," James said. "And that's actually why I wanted to meet. I've been thinking about this all weekend, and I see an opportunity here, for both of us." Angela looked intrigued. "I'm listening." James leaned forward slightly. "Elite Sky provides exceptional service. That's why Apex has used your terminals exclusively for years. But the private aviation industry as a whole has a diversity problem, both in its workforce and in how it perceives its clientele." Angela didn't disagree. "The industry has been slow to evolve, it's true. What if Elite Sky could lead that evolution?" James suggested. "What if you could become known not just for luxury service, but for inclusive luxury service? There's a growing demographic of successful professionals from diverse backgrounds who have the means to access private aviation, but often face the kind of treatment I experienced on Friday." Angela's eyes widened slightly as she caught his vision. "You're talking about a comprehensive diversity initiative." "Exactly," James confirmed. "Not just sensitivity training, which is what most companies do as a bare minimum response to incidents like this. I'm talking about a ground-up reimagining of what inclusive luxury service looks like." "That's ambitious," Angela said, but he could tell she was interested. "What exactly would it involve?" James smiled. "That's where Apex comes in. Our company has been recognized for our diversity initiatives for years. We've developed training programs, hiring practices, and client service protocols that have made us an industry leader. We could help Elite Sky develop something similar but tailored specifically for the private aviation industry." "You'd be willing to share your expertise?" Angela asked, clearly surprised by the offer. "For a price," James admitted with a slight smile. "But not the kind you're thinking. Apex and Elite Sky are about to enter negotiations for that exclusive global contract, right? The one where we'd use your terminals for all our executive travel, worldwide?" Angela nodded. This deal had been in preliminary discussions for months and would be worth millions annually to Elite Sky. "I want that contract to include provisions for implementing this diversity initiative across all Elite Sky terminals. And I want to be personally involved in developing it," James explained. "In return, you get the exclusive contract, and you get to be pioneers in the industry." Angela considered this for a moment. "So instead of filing a complaint or taking your business elsewhere, which you'd have every right to do, you want to help us become better?" "I want to help the entire industry become better," James clarified. "Elite Sky is just the starting point." For several seconds, Angela was quiet, processing the proposal. Finally, she smiled. "You know, when most CEOs are discriminated against, they either sue or take their business to a competitor. Your approach isn't unusual." James shrugged. "Lawsuits make headlines for a day and maybe cost companies some money. They rarely create lasting change. And taking my business elsewhere just passes the problem to someone else. It doesn't solve anything." He paused, looking out the window, briefly before turning back to her. I've spent my life navigating spaces that weren't designed with people like me in mind. I could keep navigating them, or I could start reshaping them. I prefer the latter. I think you're onto something powerful. Here, Angela said, nodding slowly. We'd need to get buy-in from our executive team, but speaking for myself, I'm completely on board. Good, James said. Because I've already asked my team to draft a preliminary framework. He reached for a folder on the table and handed it to her. Take a look at this when you have time. It's just a starting point. Angela accepted the folder, glancing at the contents. A detailed outline for what James was calling the Inclusive Excellence Initiative. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. You developed all this over the weekend? She asked, clearly impressed. Like I said, we've been doing this work at Apex for years. It wasn't hard to adapt our existing frameworks to fit Elite Sky's needs, James explained. The real work will be in the implementation. Angela closed the folder, a look of determination on her face. I'll take this to our CEO today, but James, I have to ask, aren't you still angry about what happened? Don't you want some kind of personal apology or acknowledgement? James considered the question carefully. Of course I was angry. I still am on some level. What happened on Friday was humiliating and dehumanizing, and it wasn't the first time I've experienced something like that. He paused. But I learned a long time ago that my anger is most useful when I channel it into creating change. An apology might make me feel better for a day. This initiative could prevent thousands of people from needing apologies in the first place. As their meeting continued, they began sketching out next steps, a timeline for presenting the initiative to Elite Sky's executive team, a plan for bringing in diversity consultants, ideas for how to measure success. Meanwhile, across town, Robert Klein sat in his apartment, scrolling through job listings on his laptop. His firing from Elite Sky had come as a shock, despite the circumstances. In his previous positions, similar behavior had either been overlooked or tacitly encouraged. For the first time, he was facing real consequences. Out of curiosity, he had Googled James Wilson over the weekend. What he found had made his stomach sink even further. Wilson wasn't just the CEO of some company. He was a major figure in the tech industry, a philanthropist, and a widely respected business leader. Articles described how he had built Apex Technologies from a small startup to a billion-dollar enterprise, how his innovations in AI were revolutionizing healthcare, how his foundation was providing scholarships to underprivileged students, and Klein had treated him like an intruder, someone who didn't belong in the rarefied air of private aviation. As he stared at the screen, an email notification appeared in the corner. It was from a contact at another luxury service company where he'd applied for a position. Thanks for your interest, it began. Unfortunately, the position has been filled. Klein closed the email without reading further. It was the third rejection he'd received since Friday. Word traveled fast in luxury service circles, and it seemed his reputation was preceding him. For the first time, he began to wonder if perhaps the problem wasn't with James Wilson or Elite Sky's policies. Maybe the problem was with him. Back at Apex headquarters, James and Angela wrapped up their meeting with a handshake. I'll present this to our executive team tomorrow, Angela promised, holding up the folder. I think they'll see the value immediately, both from a moral perspective and a business one. Let me know how it goes, James replied. And Angela, thank you for stepping in on Friday. Not everyone would have done that. I just wish I'd noticed sooner, she admitted. But that's part of the problem we're trying to solve, isn't it? The fact that these incidents happen right under our noses because we're not watching for them. After Angela left, James remained by the window looking out at the city below. His assistant appeared at the door again. Your next appointment is here, sir. And your wife called. She wanted to remind you about dinner with the Patels tonight. Thanks. David, send them in. As James turned from the window to greet his next appointment, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. What had happened at the terminal was part of a much larger problem, one that couldn't be solved overnight or with a single initiative. But it was a start. 2 weeks later, James found himself back at the Elite Sky terminal, this time for a scheduled meeting rather than a travel stop. The atmosphere was noticeably different. As he entered the main lounge, he was greeted warmly by name by several staff members, including Alan, who had been promoted to assistant manager following Klein's departure. "Mr. Wilson, it's good to see you again," Alan said, guiding him toward a conference room at the back of the terminal. "Everyone is waiting for you." Inside the conference room, James found Angela and a group of people he didn't recognize. Men and women of various ages and backgrounds, all dressed in elite sky uniforms. "James, thank you for coming," Angela said, standing to greet him. "I'd like you to meet our Inclusive Excellence Committee. These are the staff members who volunteered to lead the initiative at this terminal." James shook hands with each of them, noting their enthusiasm. The last person in the group was a middle-aged black woman with a warm smile. "And this is Dr. Lisa Reynolds," Angela continued. "She's the diversity consultant we've hired to help implement the program across all our terminals. She comes highly recommended by several Fortune 500 companies." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wilson," Dr. Reynolds said. "I've reviewed the framework you developed. It's impressive. Some of the most comprehensive diversity work I've seen in the luxury service industry." "Thank you," James replied. "But frameworks are just the beginning. The real work is in changing cultures and mindsets." Dr. Reynolds nodded in agreement. "Absolutely, and that's why I'm so encouraged by what I'm seeing here. The fact that staff members voluntarily formed this committee speaks volumes about the potential for real change." As they all took seats around the table, Angela distributed copies of what appeared to be a newly printed manual. "This is hot off the presses," she explained. "Our new Inclusive Excellence Handbook. It's being distributed to all staff members across all terminals this week, along with the announcement of mandatory training sessions." James flipped through the manual, impressed by how quickly they had moved from concept to implementation. "The DO executive team approved the full initiative," Angela continued, "including the budget allocation for training, the hiring of Dr. Reynolds and her team, and the creation of permanent inclusive excellence committees at each terminal." "That's remarkable," James said. "I expected much more pushback." Angela smiled. "There was some initial resistance, particularly around the cost. But then our CEO pointed out something interesting. The initiative you proposed would cost less annually than what we might lose if just 3 clients like Apex took their business elsewhere due to experiences like yours." "Money talks," one of the committee members commented wryly. "It does," James agreed. "But so do people. And the fact that all of you volunteered for this committee tells me there's a genuine desire for change here, not just a business calculation." For the next hour, they discussed the details of the initiative, the training program that all staff would undergo, the new protocols for client interactions, the feedback mechanisms that would be put in place to ensure accountability. As the meeting wrapped up, Angela pulled James aside. "There's one more thing I wanted to show you," she said, leading him out of the conference room and back into the main terminal area. Near the entrance, a new sign had been installed, elegant and understated, in keeping with the terminal's luxury, aesthetic but unmistakable in its message. "Elite Sky Terminals welcomes all travelers. We are committed to providing exceptional service with respect and dignity for everyone who enters our doors." James nodded approvingly. "It's a good start." "Just a start," Angela agreed. "But an important one." As they walked toward the exit, James reflected on how a moment of humiliation had transformed into an opportunity for change. Not just for himself, but potentially for countless others who would pass through these terminals in the years to come. Sometimes the most powerful response to ignorance wasn't punishment but transformation, and transformation, though harder and slower than punishment, had the potential to reach much further and last much longer. 3 months after the incident at Elite Sky Terminal, the changes were becoming visible. James noticed it immediately, as he stepped through the doors one warm summer morning. The staff was more diverse than before, for one thing, but more importantly, there was a different energy to the place, a warmth and attentiveness that went beyond the scripted politeness common in luxury services. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," greeted a young woman at the front desk. Her name tag read, "Zoe, Assistant Manager." Your flight plan has been filed and your pilot called to say he'll be arriving in about 20 minutes. Can I get you anything while you wait? We've just brewed fresh coffee. Coffee would be great. Thank you, James replied, genuinely impressed by the smooth service. As Zoe arranged for his coffee, James glanced around the terminal. The physical space looked the same, still elegantly appointed with leather seating areas and tasteful artwork. But the atmosphere had shifted. He noticed a family that appeared to be Middle Eastern being assisted by a staff member who was explaining the terminal's amenities in detail. Nearby, an elderly couple was being helped with their luggage by two attentive attendants. "Here you are, sir," Zoe said, returning with his coffee. "Ms. Chen mentioned you'd be passing through today. She asked if you might have a few minutes to meet with our committee. They have some updates they'd like to share." "Of course," James agreed. "My flight doesn't leave for an hour." Zoe led him to a small conference room where Angela was waiting with several of the staff members he'd met during his previous visit. "James, thank you for making time," Angela said, rising to shake his hand. "I know you're busy. Never too busy. For this?" he assured her, taking a seat at the table. Angela introduced two new faces, the terminal's new manager, Thomas Wright, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, and Devi Patel, who had recently been promoted to Elite Sky's corporate training department. "We wanted to share some preliminary results from the initiative," Angela began, sliding a folder across the table. "It's been 3 months, which isn't long enough for comprehensive data, but we're already seeing some interesting trends." James opened the folder, scanning the contents. Charts, graphs, and summary reports detailing the early impact of the Inclusive Excellence Initiative. "Customer satisfaction scores are up across all demographics," Thomas pointed out, indicating one of the charts. "But the most significant increases are among travelers from historically marginalized groups. We've also seen a 23% increase in applications from diverse candidates since we revised our hiring materials and processes," Devi added. "And our retention rate among existing staff from underrepresented groups has improved by 18%. James nodded, impressed but not surprised. These results track with what we've seen at Apex. Inclusive environments tend to be better for everyone, not just the groups that were previously marginalized. "Exactly," Angela agreed. "But there's something else I wanted to show you." She pulled out another document, a letter on Elite Sky letterhead. "We received this from a client last week. I thought you'd find it interesting." James took the letter, reading through it carefully. It was from the CEO of a major fashion brand, thanking Elite Sky for the improved service at their terminals. The letter specifically mentioned how the CEO, a woman of South Asian descent, had previously experienced uncomfortable interactions at private aviation facilities, but had noticed a marked improvement at Elite Sky in recent months. "She's not the only one," Thomas said. "We've received similar feedback from several clients. Word is spreading." "That's the real measure of success," James commented, handing the letter back. "Not just better statistics, but real experiences." The meeting continued, with the team sharing other updates, the rollout of new training modules, plans for expanding the initiative to international terminals, and early discussions about hosting an industry summit on inclusive luxury service. And they wrapped up. Angela walked James back to the main lounge. "There's one other development I wanted to mention," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "It's about Robert Klein." James raised an eyebrow, curious. He hadn't thought about the former terminal manager in months. "What about him?" "He reached out to me a few weeks ago," Angela explained. "He's had trouble finding another position in the industry. Apparently word got around about what happened here." "That's not surprising," James remarked, unsure where this was going. "No, it isn't, but what was surprising was why he reached out." Angela paused. "He asked if he could attend one of our diversity training sessions, voluntarily, unpaid. He said he's been doing some soul-searching, as he put it." James was genuinely surprised. "And did you let him?" "I did," Angela confirmed. "Dr. Reynolds thought it might be valuable, both for him and for the session participants, to hear his perspective on how bias can operate unconsciously." "How did it go?" "Better than I expected," Angela admitted. He spoke candidly about his assumptions and the damage they caused. No excuses, just acknowledgement. Dr. Reynolds said it was one of the most powerful sessions they've had. James was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected development. People can change, he said finally. Not all of them do, but they can. That's what we're betting on with this whole initiative, isn't it? Angela replied with a small smile. Before James could respond, Alan approached them. Mr. Wilson, your pilot has arrived. They're beginning the pre-flight checks now. Would you like to board, or would you prefer to wait in the lounge? I'll head out now, James decided. Thank you, Alan. As he gathered his belongings, Angela handed him one last document. This just came through yesterday, she said. The exclusive contract between Apex and Elite Sky, with all the provisions we discussed for continuing and expanding the initiative. It just needs your final signature. James took the contract, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. I'll have my legal team review it today, but I don't anticipate any issues. They shook hands, and as James walked toward the tarmac where his jet waited, he reflected on how much had changed in 3 months, and how much still remained to be done. On the flight back to Apex headquarters, James reviewed the contract and the data from the meeting. The numbers were encouraging, but he knew from experience that cultural change was a long-term process, not a quick fix. The real test would come over the next few years, as the initial enthusiasm gave way to the day-to-day work of maintaining and deepening the changes they'd begun. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. How did the meeting go? Better than expected, he replied. Real change happening. Her response came quickly. One terminal at a time. James smiled. Lisa had always understood his approach to change, not through grand gestures or sweeping revolutions, but through persistent, strategic efforts in specific contexts. Change one environment, then another, until the ripples began to connect and form waves. When he returned to his office, his assistant David informed him that there had been several calls from other companies in the luxury service sector, high-end hotels, exclusive clubs, even a luxury cruise line, all inquiring about Apex's diversity initiatives. Word is spreading, David explained. Apparently there's been some talk in industry circles about what's happening at Elite Sky. People are curious. James wasn't surprised. The luxury service industry was relatively small and interconnected. Success in one corner would inevitably draw attention from others. Set up meetings with any who seem genuinely interested, he instructed. But vet them carefully. I'm not interested in companies looking for a quick PR win without real commitment. Later that afternoon, James received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Wright, the new manager at Elite Sky Terminal, had come to Apex headquarters. I hope I'm not interrupting, Thomas said as he was shown into James's office. I wanted to deliver this in person. He handed James a small, elegant box. Inside was a platinum membership card for Elite Sky Terminals, but unlike the standard version, this one was engraved with the words, Founding Partner Inclusive Excellence Initiative. The first of its kind, Thomas explained. The executive team wanted you to have it as a token of appreciation. Your membership fees are waived permanently, of course. James turned the card over in his hands, touched by the gesture but aware of its deeper significance. This wasn't just about free services for one client. It was a visible, tangible symbol of the terminal's commitment to the initiative. Thank you, he said sincerely. This means a lot. There's something else, Thomas continued, taking a seat when James offered it. I've been authorized to discuss expanding our partnership beyond just Apex's corporate travel needs. I'm listening, James said, intrigued. Elite Sky's parent company owns several other luxury service businesses, hotels, car services, private clubs. They're interested in implementing similar initiatives across all their properties. Thomas paused. They're prepared to make a significant investment, both financially and in terms of organizational commitment. James leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. What had begun as a response to a single incident of discrimination was potentially evolving into something much larger. a comprehensive approach to transforming the culture of luxury services across multiple industries. That would require substantial resources from Apex, he said thoughtfully. We're not a diversity consulting firm. No, Thomas agreed. But you've demonstrated something powerful, that these changes can be implemented successfully in real-world luxury environments without compromising the quality of service. That's extremely valuable. James nodded slowly. Let me think about it. This would go well beyond our current arrangement. After Thomas left, James sat at his desk for a long time, turning the platinum card over in his hands and thinking about paths not taken. He could have responded to Klein's behavior with anger and legal action. He could have simply taken Apex's business elsewhere. Either response would have been justified, but instead, he had chosen a different path, one that required more effort and commitment, but also offered the possibility of more profound change. His phone buzzed with another text from Lisa. Don't forget, dinner with the foundation board tonight at 7. The reminder shifted his thoughts to the educational foundation he and Lisa had established 5 years earlier, which provided scholarships and mentoring to students from underserved communities. Many of those students were now graduating and entering professional fields, where they would face their own challenges navigating spaces that weren't designed with them in mind. What if the work at Elite Sky could help create more inclusive environments for them to enter? James picked up his phone and called Angela. About the expansion proposal Thomas mentioned, he said when she answered. I think I'm interested, but with a modification. Instead of Apex leading the consulting directly, what if we established a separate foundation specifically focused on inclusive excellence in luxury services? A foundation? Angela sounded intrigued. What would that look like? It would bring together experts from various fields, diversity consultants, luxury service professionals, corporate trainers, to develop comprehensive programs that could be implemented across different sectors, James explained, the idea taking shape as he spoke. Apex would provide initial funding and expertise, but it would be an independent entity with its own board and leadership. That could work, Angela said thoughtfully. It would certainly have more credibility as an independent organization, rather, than just an Apex initiative. Exactly. And it could potentially reach far beyond just Elite Sky's parent company, James added. We could create an industry-wide transformation. By the time he left the office that evening, James had already made several calls to begin exploring the possibility. What had started as an ugly confrontation in a private terminal was evolving into something he had never anticipated, a potential movement for change throughout an entire industry. As he drove home, he thought about Robert Klein, the man whose actions had set all this in motion. James wondered what Klein would think if he could see the ripple effects of that confrontation, how a moment of discrimination had inadvertently sparked an initiative that might eventually transform the very industry where he had worked. Sometimes, James reflected, the most powerful changes began in the most unlikely moments. And sometimes, the best response to being treated as if you didn't belong was to reshape the entire concept of belonging itself. 2 years had passed since that fateful evening at Elite Sky Terminal. On a bright autumn morning, James Wilson stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel, looking out at a sea of faces. The room was filled with leaders from across the luxury service industry, executives from private aviation companies, 5-star hotel chains, exclusive resorts, high-end retail, and premium transportation services. Welcome to the second annual Inclusive Excellence Summit, James began, his voice steady and clear in the microphone. When we gathered last year, this initiative was still in its infancy. Today, I'm proud to say that over 200 companies have joined the movement, implementing comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs throughout their organizations. The audience applauded, and James caught Lisa's eye from her seat in the front row. She gave him a subtle thumbs up, and he smiled before continuing. 2 years ago, I walked into a private aviation terminal and was treated like an intruder. It wasn't the first time I'd experienced such treatment, but it led to something I never expected, the creation of the Inclusive Excellence Foundation and a transformation that is reshaping an entire industry. In the 2 years since the incident with Robert Klein, The foundation that had begun as a simple idea during a phone call with Angela Chen had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started with Elite Sky's parent company had expanded to include competitors and businesses across the spectrum of luxury services. The numbers speak for themselves, James continued, gesturing to the large screen behind him where data points appeared. Across participating companies, customer satisfaction scores have risen by an average of 27%. Employee retention has improved by 31%. And perhaps most significantly, revenue has increased by an average of 18%. He paused, letting those figures sink in. But numbers only tell part of the story. The real success lies in the experiences of both clients and employees, who no longer have to navigate spaces where they feel unwelcome or out of place. In the audience, Angela Chen nodded in agreement. As the newly appointed Chief Inclusion Officer for Elite Sky's parent company, she had been instrumental in expanding the initiative beyond private aviation. Today I'd like to introduce someone whose perspective I think you'll find valuable, James said, gesturing toward the side of the stage. Please welcome Robert Klein. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience as Robert walked onto the stage. He looked different from the man James had encountered 2 years earlier. Humbler somehow, less rigid in his bearing. James stepped aside, allowing Robert to take the podium. Thank you, James, Robert began, his voice slightly nervous. For those who don't know me, I'm the reason we're all here today, though not in the way you might think. He went on to recount the incident from his perspective, how his unconscious biases had led him to make immediate assumptions about James, how he had acted on those assumptions in ways that were dismissive and dehumanizing, and how the consequences of those actions had eventually led him to confront his own prejudices. 2 years ago, I lost my job because I couldn't see past my own preconceptions, Robert explained candidly. I thought my career in luxury services was over, and honestly, it should have been. What I did was inexcusable. He paused, taking a deep breath. But then something unexpected happened. 6 months after I was fired, I received a call from Dr. Lisa Reynolds at the newly formed Inclusive Excellence Foundation. They were developing a training program and wanted to include perspectives from people who had demonstrated bias in luxury service settings. Dr. Reynolds asked if I would be willing to share my experience as a case study. In the front row, Dr. Reynolds smiled encouragingly at Robert. As the Foundation's director of training, she had recognized the powerful impact that Robert's story could have when used as a teaching tool. My first instinct was to say no, Robert continued. It was humiliating to think about sharing my worst professional moment with others, but I realized that if my mistake could help prevent others from making similar ones, maybe some good could come from it after all. Robert went on to explain how that initial case study had evolved into a regular role with the Foundation. He now traveled to different companies, sharing his story as part of their training programs and helping managers identify and address their own unconscious biases. I'm not proud of what I did, he said, wrapping up his speech. But I am proud of what's happened since, not because of me, but because of how James Wilson chose to respond. Not with anger or retribution, but with a vision for change that has affected thousands of lives for the better. The audience gave Robert a respectful round of applause as he returned to his seat and James stepped back to the podium. Thank you, Robert, he said sincerely. It takes courage to share that kind of story. James then introduced the next segment of the summit, a panel discussion featuring employees and clients from various companies who had experienced the impact of the Inclusive Excellence Initiative firsthand. Among the panelists was Zoe, who had been promoted to terminal manager at Elite Sky after Thomas moved up to a corporate position. There was also a hotel concierge who had implemented new protocols for welcoming international guests, a retail executive who had revamped hiring practices at luxury boutiques, and several clients who shared their experiences before and after the changes. One of the most powerful moments came when an older gentleman, the CEO of a successful tech startup, described how he had been mistaken for a delivery person 3 separate times when entering high-end establishments, despite his tailored suits and executive demeanor. The last time it happened was 14 months ago, he explained. Since then, I've visited dozens of businesses that have adopted the inclusive excellence standards, and the difference is remarkable. It's not just about avoiding negative experiences. It's about creating genuinely welcoming environments where everyone is treated with the same level of respect and attention. As the morning sessions concluded and attendees broke for lunch, James found himself surrounded by people eager to share their own stories or ask questions about implementing the initiative at their companies. Lisa appeared at his side, skillfully, helping him navigate the conversations while ensuring he actually got something to eat. After 20 years of marriage, they had developed an effortless rhythm for these kinds of events. "You need to see this," she said quietly when they finally had a moment alone, showing him her tablet. It was an article from a major business publication, just published that morning. Luxury Service Revolution: How One CEO's Bad Experience Launched an Industry-Wide Transformation. James skimmed the article, which detailed the growth and impact of the Inclusive Excellence Initiative and highlighted how it had spread from private aviation to hotels, retail, and beyond. The piece ended with a quote from a luxury industry analyst. "What began as a response to a single incident has evolved into one of the most significant cultural shifts the luxury service sector has seen in decades. The Wilson approach, as it's now being called, demonstrates that inclusive excellence and premium service aren't just compatible, they're complementary." "The Wilson approach?" James said with a raised eyebrow. "That's new." "It's catching on," Lisa replied with a smile. "I've heard at least 3 people use the phrase this morning." Before James could respond, Angela approached them. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's someone I thought you might want to meet." She gestured to a young man standing nearby, looking slightly overwhelmed by the crowd. "This is Taylor Jones," Angela introduced him. "He just started as a client services representative at our Chicago terminal last month." James shook the young man's hand warmly. "Welcome to Elite Sky. How are you finding it so far?" "It's amazing, sir," Taylor replied, his enthusiasm evident. "Actually, you're the reason I applied for the job." "Oh?" James looked curious. "Yes, sir. I saw you speak at my college last year about the Inclusive Excellence Initiative. I was in the hospitality program, and what you said about creating environments where everyone feels valued really stuck with me. When I saw Elite Sky was hiring, I remembered they were one of the first companies to implement the initiative, so I applied right away." James was touched. "Well, I'm glad to hear it. We need bright young people like you in this industry." "That's not all," Angela added with a smile. "Tell him about your idea, Taylor." Taylor looked slightly embarrassed. "Well, during our training, we learned about what happened with you at the terminal 2 years ago, and it got me thinking about how we could go beyond just avoiding those kinds of incidents. So I developed a proposal for a new welcome protocol specifically designed to ensure that first-time visitors feel comfortable and valued, regardless of how they look or dress." "He submitted it through our innovation portal," Angela explained. "Our executive team was so impressed that they're implementing it system-wide next month." James felt a wave of satisfaction. This was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all, inspiring a new generation to not just continue the work but to expand and improve upon it. "I'd love to hear more about your protocol," James told Taylor sincerely. As Taylor enthusiastically explained his ideas, James caught Robert Klein watching them from across the room. Their eyes met briefly, and Robert gave a small nod of acknowledgement, a gesture that contained volumes: regret for the past, appreciation for the present, hope for the future. Later that afternoon, as the summit continued with breakout sessions and workshops, James slipped away to a quiet corner of the venue. He needed a moment alone to process the emotions of the day. Looking out the window at the city skyline, he thought about how far they had come from that confrontation 2 years ago. What could have ended with a complaint, a lawsuit, or simply taking his business elsewhere had instead sparked something much more significant. His phone buzzed with a text message from David, his assistant. "Just got word that the Singapore hotel group signed on to the initiative. That's the last major luxury chain in Asia. We've now got coverage on every continent except Antarctica." James smiled at the message. Global reach had been a goal from the beginning, recognizing that issues of inclusivity in luxury services weren't limited to any one country or region. A moment later, Lisa found him in his quiet corner. "Everything okay?" she asked, concerned. "More than okay," he assured her. "Just taking it all in. Sometimes I can't believe how far this has come from where it started." Lisa squeezed his hand. "That's because most people would have responded differently. They would have fought fire with fire or just walked away." "Maybe that would have been easier," James acknowledged. "Easier, yes. But not better," Lisa pointed out. "Not for you. And certainly not for all the people who are benefiting from these changes now." They were interrupted by Dr. Reynolds, who approached with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to disturb you both, but we're about to begin the CEO roundtable, James, and they're waiting for you to moderate." "Of course," James said, straightening his tie. "I'll be right there." As they walked back toward the conference rooms, Dr. Reynolds updated them on the afternoon's events and the record attendance for the various sessions. "By the way," she added, "we just got confirmation that the footage from this morning's sessions has already been viewed over 50,000 times on the live stream. The interest in this year's summit has far exceeded our projections." The final session of the day was a roundtable discussion with CEOs and presidents from major luxury brands who had implemented the Inclusive Excellence Initiative. As James guided the conversation, he was struck by how these leaders, once skeptical about the business value of such changes, now spoke passionately about the positive impacts they had witnessed. "It's transformed our company culture," said the CEO of a renowned hotel chain. "We're seeing higher employee engagement, better customer feedback, and frankly, better financial results. What began as a moral imperative has proven to be good business strategy as well." Others shared similar experiences, how the initiative had helped them attract top talent from diverse backgrounds, expand into new markets, and build stronger connections with an increasingly diverse clientele. As the summit concluded and attendees began to disperse, James stood once more at the podium to deliver closing remarks. 2 years ago, I experienced something that millions of people face every day. The pain of being judged not by who I am, but by how I look. It would have been easy to respond with anger, to demand punishment for the individual involved, or to simply take my business elsewhere. He paused, looking out at the attentive faces. But those responses, while understandable, wouldn't have created lasting change. Instead, we chose a different path, one that required more effort, more commitment, and more courage from everyone involved. We chose to transform the experience not just for one person in one moment, but for countless people in countless moments to come. James glanced at Robert Klein, who sat quietly in the audience. "This initiative isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about recognizing that we all have biases, we all make assumptions, and we all have the capacity to do better. It's about creating environments where excellence and inclusivity go hand in hand, where luxury service truly means service for all who enter, regardless of race, gender, religion, or background." As applause filled the room, James felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with humiliation and anger 2 years ago had transformed into something powerful and positive. Later that evening, as James and Lisa drove home, she asked a question that caught him slightly off guard. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Robert Klein hadn't been working that night? If someone else had been at the desk, and you'd just gone on your way without incident?" James considered this for a moment. "Sometimes. I probably would have gotten home earlier." He smiled briefly before turning serious again. "But the truth is, if it hadn't been that night with Klein, it would have been another night with someone else. These incidents happen every day, in luxury spaces all over the world. I was just in a position to do something about it when it happened to me. And you chose to do something constructive rather than destructive," Lisa pointed out. "It wasn't entirely altruistic," James admitted. "I wanted to create a world where our children wouldn't have to face the same obstacles we did, where they wouldn't have to develop the thick skin and careful strategies that we've needed to navigate these spaces." Lisa nodded, understanding. Their teenage son and daughter were already moving through a world that was still far from perfect, but perhaps slightly better than the one James and Lisa had faced at their age. As they pulled into their driveway, James's phone rang. It was Angela. "Sorry to call so late," she began. but I thought you'd want to know right away. The International Luxury Service Association just announced that they're adopting the Inclusive Excellence Standards as part of their official certification process. Starting next year, companies won't be able to receive or maintain their 5-star ratings without meeting these standards. James felt a surge of satisfaction. This was a tipping point. The moment when what had begun as a voluntary initiative became an industry standard. That's fantastic news, he told her. It means this continues even if we step back someday. Exactly, Angela agreed. It's no longer dependent on us pushing it forward. It's self-sustaining now. After ending the call, James sat in the car for a moment longer, processing the significance of this development. Good news? Lisa asked. The best kind, he replied. The kind that means we've created something that will outlast us. As they walked into their home together, James thought about the long journey from that confrontation at the terminal to this moment of industry-wide transformation. It hadn't been easy, and there had been plenty of resistance along the way. Companies that saw the initiative as too costly, executives who didn't see the value, skeptics who questioned whether real change was possible. But now, 2 years later, the evidence was undeniable. The Inclusive Excellence Initiative wasn't just making luxury spaces more welcoming for diverse clients. It was making them better for everyone, more attentive, more personal, more truly luxurious in the ways that mattered most. What had begun with one man's bad behavior and another's choice to respond constructively had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined, a revolution in how luxury service was defined, delivered, and experienced around the world. Sometimes, James reflected, the most powerful response to ignorance isn't anger, but vision. Not retribution, but transformation. Not a closed door, but an open one that leads to a better space for everyone who walks through.